Previously on Bound by the Alpha, the chill in the air deepened as the growl echoed across the garden. Every wolf felt it, the sense that something still watched. "I tried, Selen. I would have fought the world for you, but I can't fight fate." Selen moved quietly through the corridor, arms burdened with towels, careful to avoid the cracks in the worn wooden floor that always betrayed her presence. She hoped, as she did every day, to make herself invisible, to finish her work, and slip away before anyone noticed. But Keal's shadow stretched across the open doorway, barring her way. He didn't speak right away, only regarded her with a searching look that made her skin prickle. For a long, awkward moment, she considered turning around and taking the back stairs, but pride, or maybe spite, kept her feet still. "You shouldn't have to carry all that alone," he said finally, his voice low and beautifully empty of command. He didn't move to take the towels from her or close the distance, but something softened in his eyes that left her more unsettled than ever. "No one else will," Selen replied, determined to sound brisk and unaffected. She pressed past him, the towels forming a fragile shield between them. Keal let her pass, but lingered in the threshold, watching her with a careful curiosity that made her acutely aware of every step. She hated how his presence filled the hall, how her own heart stuttered with annoyance. Or was it something else she refused to name? Later, as she scrubbed at mudstains in the main foyer, she heard his footsteps again, heavy and deliberate. She did not look up, but her shoulders tensed anyway. "Did you sleep at all last night?" he asked from the hearth, a note of concern layered beneath the gruffness. Selen set her jaw, scrubbing harder. What difference would it make? "I'm the only one who has to be up before dawn." She heard him exhale, the quiet weight of disappointment. There was silence, thick and not unkind, before he responded, "It matters to me." She nearly laughed at that, bitter and light-headed at the same time. But when she glanced up, Keal was not smirking, not posturing any more than necessary. He looked tired too. "If you ever want help, you can ask," he said finally, almost as if he meant it. Selen shook her head, more tired than angry. "It's not help if it doesn't change anything." He left her, then, the silence raw between them, but for the first time she didn't feel entirely unseen. Lyra lingered at the edge of the evening meal, eyes following Keal's every move. He barely spoke, every answer clipped, his attention already miles away. When she placed a hopeful hand on his arm, he only shifted away, murmured an empty thanks for the food, and left her in the doorway, feeling suddenly, utterly alone. She stood in the flickering light, fighting to keep her face neutral, refusing to believe she could ever be replaced. Not by a wolfless outsider, not by anyone. Restless and stung, Lyra found her way outside, the night air sharp against her skin. She spotted Corvin pacing the perimeter, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the forest shadows. She joined him, her tone brittle. "You look about as pleased as I feel tonight." Corvin barely glanced her way. "Didn't seem like your company was wanted." Lyra choked on the truth, then leaned into the familiar ache. "Keal is a fool. He'd throw away everything, for a nobody." Corvin grunted. "You knew what we were, Lyra." Mates don't mean much when power's the prize. Pain flashed in her expression, quickly hidden. Power gets you something real, at least. Affection never lasts. Corvin's jaw worked. "You'll get what you want, I suppose." But neither found solace beside the other, and Lyra left first. Long after Lyra vanished, Maris drifted to Corvin's side, quiet as mist. He didn't turn, lost in thoughts that never included her. She offered a tentative touch, just her fingers at his sleeve. "Cold tonight," she said, her voice barely louder than the wind. Corvin let out a sigh, and without thinking, let her rest her head on his shoulder. He spoke softly, kindness without passion. "You don't have to wait up for me, Maris." She closed her eyes, clinging to the moment, knowing it was borrowed. "I don't mind," she whispered. "I like it when you're not angry." For a while they stood that way, her hope, his resignation, and the unspoken name of another woman blooming cold between them. At dawn, Selen passed by the courtyard, hearing Lyra's voice through an open window, hard edges, brittle laughter. By the barn, Maris watched Corvin saddle his horse in sullen silence. Even Keal, usually steady, seemed unsettled as he brushed past Selen in the hall, pausing just an extra moment as though he wanted to say something, but let the words die. The pack felt charged, every touch grazed by longing. Selen felt it coil in her chest too, the sense everyone wanted something just out of reach, some piece of affection or belonging denied. Lyra lingered by her mirror, brushing her hair with mechanical fury, the bristles catching in snarls she didn't try to untangle. She caught her reflection's bitterness, the way longing etched lines at the edge of her eyes, how power never softened a mouth left so rarely kissed. Outside came the voices of packmates starting their day, but she waited until the sound of Keal's boots faded before descending. She would not be the first to chase him. Corvin leaned beside the stable doors, gaze narrowed on Keal as the Alpha crossed the main yard, all-purpose and silent storm. He remembered Lyra's touch in the dark, the way she'd sought warmth and given none. He wondered how long anyone could deny their own blood and expect to be whole. He spat into the dust, then called after Keal. "Your head's been in the clouds, boss." "Trouble's coming, don't miss it for a ghost." Keal gave a wordless nod, not meeting Corvin's eyes. Maris moved like a shadow at the edge of every gathering, ears open, notes taken. Yet her heart was elsewhere. On Corvin's rough hands, the rare flashes of gentleness she wished he'd spend on her. Each day's secrets weighed heavier. She wanted, sometimes desperately, to be seen for something besides her usefulness as a spy. She found herself near the kitchen, watching Selena knead bread dough with weary, methodical focus. For a moment, Maris considered sitting beside her, just to have someone know her beyond her mission. But she stayed invisible, as always, and drifted on. Later that evening, as a pale dusk brought a hush to the house, Selene mopped the entryway, burning with questions she'd never ask. Keal entered, pausing at the threshold, surveying the progress she'd made. He cleared his throat, uncertain. "You make it feel cleaner here than it's ever been." Selene kept her gaze on the water swirling in the bucket. "Some things you can scrub and never get them clean." "They always come back," Keal didn't answer, but he stood there longer than was necessary. She wondered for half a heartbeat if he was waiting for her to say more. When she finally looked up, their eyes met, hers wary, his searching, and for once, the silence felt less like a wall and more like an offering she didn't yet know how to accept. He saw Selena before she saw him, stooped over a bucket in the entry, her hair pulled back and face set in determination. There was a discipline in her work, scrubbing, folding, stacking, that he recognized. It was the discipline of survival, of people who never expected thanks. He was ashamed suddenly, for all the times he'd walked these halls blind to small kindnesses. Rylan was gone. Keal missed that wolf's easy humor more than he'd admit, missed the way he'd reminded the entire house what warmth looked like. The moon hung low over the yard as Maris finished her rounds, coat pulled tight against the wind. She'd always hated early spring. The smell of thaw and rot, the sound of old ghosts rattling through the eaves. This was the season her first pack had cast her out, the bite of betrayal still raw in her memory. Even now, years later, she sometimes woke expecting their voices, accusing, cruel. But only the hush of this strange, divided house greeted her. She paused by Corvin's quarters, hearing the scrape of boots and the sigh of his breath. Maris wanted to press her palm to the door, let the wood carry the secret that ached inside her chest, that she had spied for survival. Yes, but somewhere along the line she had begun to hope for something more. She wasn't sure if loyalty or longing would win out in the end. Above, a window creaked open. Lyra's window, she guessed, the silhouette sharp and restless. This house was full of shadows, Maris thought, all of them yearning for things they might never claim. The horses were restless tonight, stamping and flicking their ears in the dim lantern glow. Corvin moved among them with practiced calm, his voice barely more than a murmur, a sound he'd carried with him since his first days in this place. Most wolves lorded their presence over the stables. Corvin found them easier, sometimes, than people. He remembered, as he checked a bandage on a dun mare's leg, the winter Darius found him alone in the wild, ragged, half-starved, defiant enough to bite the alpha's hand even as frostbitten fingers clung to survival. He'd never been given much: food, a bed, a place in the ranks, and a set of orders. Family was something other wolves talked about with laughter or lament. Corvin spoke of it only in the silence between his chores, and in the scars he never explained. A creak on the stall's hinge told him Maris had returned, hovering at the edge of his light. He didn't turn, but he softened his tone a fraction for her sake. "You ever sleep, Maris?" he asked, gruff but not unfriendly. She hesitated, as if weighing whether this was a real invitation. "Not much these days." "The house, things wake me up." Corvin snorted, checking the last knot in the mare's bandage. "You'll get used to it. Or you'll just get better at ignoring what keeps you up." She watched him a moment longer, something like yearning in her eyes. "Did Darius teach you that?" she ventured, only half joking. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes unreadable. "Darius taught me how to run, how to fight, how to keep my head down and my knives sharp. Everything else I had to learn on my own." Something flickered, pain, maybe, or the ghost of old hope. Before Maris could ask more, Corvin ducked out of the stall, brushing past with the faintest brush of warmth. "Get some rest," he said. No good ever came from chasing ghosts at midnight. But as he left, he wondered if it was the ghosts chasing him, or if he kept their company by choice. Lyra had never known a life without power. Her father's, wielded like a sword and a leash. In Darius's eyes, she was always a chess piece, groomed for alliances, praised for obedience, punished for softness. She took his lessons with childhood's easy faith, learning to trade warmth for leverage long before she was grown. Love, she understood early, meant vulnerability and debt. She watched her father bend fate for his own ends, watched her mother dim and then vanish without a trace. By the time Lyra felt Corvin's mate bond bloom within her, she recognized it as a threat, a tie she could not control, a promise that would make her less useful, less free. She wanted, needed, to be more than her father's daughter. Keal was her opportunity. Young, promising, maybe even moldable. A new alpha, not yet hardened by a crude world. If she could secure his attention, she could become more than just a pawn. She could hold the board. But Keal's coldness stung sharper than she'd like to admit. That was when she turned to Corvin, not out of love, but because some part of her craved to be wantable. She'd never commit to him. If Keal called, she would cast Corvin aside for status and authority in a heartbeat. She told herself it wasn't cruelty, just survival. Let Selen believe she had a chance with Keal, Lyra thought, and she'll learn quickly how little this house rewards kindness. In the quiet of her father's house, Lyra dressed and watched her own reflection with the practiced gaze of someone who knew precisely the value and limits of beauty and blood. In the shadowed hush of Darius's study, dust sparkled along the shelves, catching in the rays of the setting sun. Lyra stood at the window, arms folded, her gaze on the dark stretch of yard below. Darius paced behind her, each step measured, pausing occasionally to tap his fingers atop a stack of crumbling ledgers. "It's not like you to be so distant," he said at last, voice as smooth and sharp as a blade's spine. "You've been letting that boy slip away." Lyra bristled, flicking a lock of hair behind her shoulder. "Keal is distracted. And you, father, have been more interested in your correspondence than your heirs." Darius's chuckle was dry. "You've always known how to wound, Lyra. But you want more, don't you? Not just Keal's affections or the mate bond you pretended to ignore. You want the title, the power, you want your place at my table." She turned from the window, every inch the daughter he'd trained, wary, ambitious, hunger tightly coiled. "I'm not Selena to accept scraps. If Keal falls to someone else, I want your word you'll support me, whatever I must do to keep what's mine." Darius crossed the room, placing both hands on the back of his chair. "You have my word. But everything comes with a price. If you want power, you'd better be ready to use it, even against blood." Lyra's eyes narrowed. Promise and warning, a game she'd played since girlhood. She sat opposite him, folding her hands atop the desk. "Just as you raised me, father," she said, "I'm done letting fate choose for me." Between them, the future gleamed as dangerous and tempting as any blade. For the first time in weeks, Lyra felt ready to draw blood. The night was thick with the scent of pine and distant rain, old comforts Keal barely noticed anymore. Sitting alone on the porch, he toyed with a battered silver ring, a legacy piece from his father, its design already worn smooth by anxious fingertips. The chill in the air did little to ease the heat in his thoughts. He hadn't always been alpha, not even close. He was barely 16 the autumn his father didn't come home, carried off by the kind of sickness even wolf blood couldn't heal. The memory replayed nightly, the shock that fractured his mother's voice, the confusion of wolves, twice his age, looking to him for orders he wasn't ready to give. He'd spoken with bluster then, hiding the endless roar of his own doubts. Survival was proving over and over that he could lead. Leadership, he'd learned, was mostly loneliness punctuated by impossible choices. He remembered his first month in power, sleepless and raw, every decision a test. He'd lost friends who wanted a softer hand, earned only grudging respect from old warriors. Still, he'd learned, faster than any boy should have to, what it meant to be obeyed, what it meant to be hated, and, worse, what it meant to be needed. Now, as alpha, the world expected certainty. But inside, Keal still carried the ghosts of that frightened teenager, pacing a stripped bare house, making bargains with fate. "If you let me get this one thing right, I won't fail them ever again." His gaze drifted to the flicker of movement indoors. Selen, making her rounds, silent but always steady. A different kind of strength. He envied her that, the quiet kind. He wished, sometimes wild, impossible wishes, that leadership could be as simple as carrying weight alone, never having to explain just how heavy it was. She'd been brought to this house with little explanation, just old enough to remember her mother's hurried packing, the tremor in her voice as they crossed the wild lands alone. Her mother's name, always whispered, soft and strange, anchored her in memory like a charm against nightmares. She could not shake the urgency in those last words. "Hide your wolf always. Do not let them see. Do not let them scent what you are." She never understood why. Other children boasted of their shifting, their growing claws and fangs, but Selen only practiced restraint, magic woven in secret beneath her breath. Each lesson was wound with dread. Wolves and witches, her mother said, brought ruin to each other. No one would forgive a child born of both. Especially not Darius, whose cold hospitality always felt edged with suspicion. Why her mother left, or if she was still alive, Selen could not say. Sometimes she caught glimpses of herself in darkened glass, her eyes shifting, her senses prickling, and sensed she was something neither side would embrace. But the truth had always stayed out of reach, buried under warnings and the strict discipline of survival. She kept her secret because there was no other way, not until someone, someday, would see through her quiet and call her by her true nature, whatever that turned out to be. The last pale light of dusk bled from the sky as Selen finished her work. The hush in the house stretched so thin it seemed one breath would break it. Most nights she moved unseen, but tonight her steps echoed. Some instinct prickled across the back of her neck, ancient and wolfish, a warning she'd never learned to ignore. Upstairs, Keal's voice rumbled in fierce argument with Darius behind a closed door. Lyra's laughter drifted from the library, too sharp to be real. She paused at the top of the stair, shadow flickering, a shape where there should be none. A rough hand clamped over her mouth before she could scream. Marek, large, merciless, and unmistakably not of Keal's pack, wrenched her against him. She fought, remembered spells on Isolde's tongue, but fear and surprise made her clumsy. Linen spilled, feet kicked against bare boards. Only the echo answered. Marek bent close, breath hot against her ear. "You'll make a fine trophy for my alpha," he sneered. "A gift for Corbin, one he'll thank me for, soon enough." His grip was iron, her own magic tangled, useless as thread. As she was dragged, half silenced and desperate, down the servants' stair, the house around her remained oblivious. No one saw. No one stopped him. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, and darkness closed in. Somewhere in the yard, Selen's cry died before it left her lips, the moon bearing silent witness as fate swept her from the only home she'd ever managed to survive. And in the shadows beyond, a pair of amber eyes gleamed, watchful, waiting, plotting what would come next.